you very much. So my name is easy to pronounce, Hutchings. The company's name, Withings, is much harder. And so it's long story short, it's what happens when French guys come up with an English name. So, I've been myself saying it in a different way. So I'm very glad and honored to be here. I was very fascinated with some of the former presentation. And, I'm glad in a way to be part of this community. And hopefully what I can share is that somewhat by chance, I came up to this community. So I'm the co-founder of Withings, so yeah, I should start. So, for the past 9 years at Withings, we developed digital health products and applications that at first help people transform the way how people manage their own health. And we started, and I think we always will start with the individual. Withings joined Nokia back in June 2016, and I'm now leading the digital health activity at Nokia out from the San Francisco and Sunnyvale offices, so quite near here. So I discovered that, Nokia's current goal, and I just take a second on it, is to be expanding the human possibility of technologies. I really like to make a pause here because until the very last presentation, I did not hear a lot about the user-centric view, the end-user view, and I think it's very important. And as a tech, company, for sure we are very careful on, and we try every day not to develop technologies that people will be serving, but really the other way around. So today, I would like to, spend a few minutes with you and share, our vision of digital health, and maybe more importantly, a few examples on how we execute toward this vision. So we believe that I'd say here that the cures is really in the data. And as I think you all understand here, what I mean by that is that massive patient-generated health data contain a lot of insights that will inform medicine, that can save lives, and that in many ways. And I would like to speak about 3 challenges for this really to happen, that we have tackled over the past years, and we're still working on. The first one is, how do we generate a consistent and sustainable stream of data, of consistent data? And how do we do that on the long term? With no data, there will not be insight. Second is, how do we make insights out of this data? How do we make knowledge out of this data? And third, for sure, I talk about saving lives. So how do we inform action? How do we turn this insight into actions? So at the beginning, I said, so we start with the individual. So back 9 years ago, we developed a scale as engineers, and we wanted to do a useful scale. So a scale that will simply, instead of just throwing and maybe triggering an emotion when you step on it, that will monitor your weight. And the way we see monitoring is graphing. And we were doing a scale that will simply graph the weight trend, weight evolution in the device that now happens to be very frequently in our pockets on a smartphone, and eventually shares this information if it's useful for the user to share a weight trend or weight evolution. So think about nutritionist or any kind of caregiver or coach. That's how we started. And in fact, we discovered that something that was totally unexpected for us is that it turned out to be a behavioral change device. It did trigger some change of behavior that we did measure. We did get a lot of testimonial by our users, but literally we were measuring weight loss, change of behavior, increased activity just by using this device. We were, digging and trying to understand what happened, but the very notion of having this constant feedback loop, that is streamed without calling for any extra step, actually, any going too much away from your routine, does generate some change of behavior. And that informed the rest of our roadmap and the story of Withings back at the time. So the scale was soon joined by other connected health devices. So blood pressure monitor, trackers, sleep sensors, thermometers. So all devices ranging both from unregulated, or what will be called wellness space, to regulated. So obviously like blood pressure monitors that requires a pre-market authorization. I will just also, I cannot help mentioning that, so I'm very glad to see that our blood pressure monitor is used by Ushner, and that you saw this image of the blood pressure before. And I think it's not by chance. And when we developed each of our devices, we actually wanted that all the devices look cool and sexy, that people want to have it and want to use it. We did not take as granted that the blood pressure monitor has to be something ugly and maybe that generates some anxiety and remind everybody using it that you are sick and you should check your blood pressure monitor. I think part of the novelty of what we did is doing actually consumer-grade products that can generate medical-grade or clinical-grade data information. I think it's a very important point. And also across this product, I do think that doing simple-to-use product does not prevent us to do very advanced type of measurements. So we've seen in previous information all the data that can be generated out of the device. Our latest generation of scale does measure pulse wave velocity. So this is totally new, but it does not call for many new ways of using it. You may have to stand on the scale a few seconds more, but for the first time in a home environment, we can capture and gather and monitor on the long term pulse wave velocity, which is essential cardiovascular risk factors. So I do think that we can do consumer-grade device with simple and consumer-grade experience and that generate on the long term, because this device can fit in our everyday life for the long term, but that generate stream of medical-grade data. So what do we do with this data to generate insights? Basically, we look back, we look real-time, and we look forward by setting up new cohorts. I'll give you a few examples on each of these ways to generate insight. Looking back is leveraging the fact that for the past years, we've developed massive database of multidimensional across a large segment of population data that we can de-identify, and along with partners such as Scripps here and among many others, we can look back and spot on different trends and correlation. I think we heard it thanks to Michael and also recently that having a baseline or generating a baseline is a very important factor. And for hypertension remote patient or remote monitoring of hypertension, better understanding the variability of the blood pressure is a very strong need. So we've looked back on our data, and along with Scripps, we spot on several bias that were visible in our database. So we did learn and publish during the American Heart Association scientific session recently some of the learnings we did discover on this database. So a bias between female and male by age on the index, variability index of the blood pressure measuring. Weekdays and weekends, and even surprisingly on the season. So we saw among our user base a higher variability of blood pressure during winter time. So all these insights obviously were generated by looking back at our data, and we do have a lot of partnership and encourage, and hopefully also here today, encourage partners to come to us, and we can share some anonymous and unidentified data to hopefully generate this kind of insights that will inform or create some useful baseline. I talked about the past. We also generate and publish, so on our website, real-time dashboard. So 2 examples among many others. We do a graph on real-time, and you can check on our website the percentage of overweight and obese population by states here in the US, or on the right-hand side, some correlation studies, but that run again real-time between sleep-deprived users and blood pressure status. So this information hopefully can help also inform some even public health policy initiatives. We did recently publish one in France that showed the prevalence of obesity across different cities. And these studies was called to change the diets in the public school of the cities that were spotted as the most, showing the most prevalence of obesity among young population. So again, we are the third point, so I'm conscious of the time, sorry. The third point is that we are looking also forwards, and we know that we do not gather through our portfolio all the required data sets, and we should complement this data set with many other, coming from device, coming from users and research team. And so we encourage to develop new cohorts. Some example here with partner with Medicine X actually here to call for teams who will use our devices and dataset, again, looking forwards in a controlled manner to spot on trend and correlation. How we do translate, hopefully these learnings and insight into actions. I just take two examples, both ends, from the end user point of view and from the caregiver point of view. First, as tech developer, we do inform our roadmap and specifically our product features roadmap from the correlation and the insight I mentioned before. So a few examples, we've measured that among our user base, people who tend to set a weight goal do experience a weight loss that is very much more sustainable on the long term than the people who do not. Of course, that informs the way we do propose and expose this type of feature in our application to encourage people to set a goal, to encourage people to have constant refresh of their value. So, for example, to encourage people to step on a scale. And that can come up to various what will be weird features to encourage people to step on a scale, like showing off the weather forecast on the scale on the morning, that just give an additional reason to step from time to time on the scale, but that we know will impact the outcome of the scale usage. We also learn about the needs for specific coaching programs that we also add in our application. So in a summary, we do inform and shape our product features and roadmap from this insight in order for our products to be more impactful on the end user behavior. On the other end of the spectrum, so we have a fascinating presentation with what Ushner is doing, and so I'll be very short on what we develop with a solution called patient care solution, remote patient care solutions that enable physicians not to look at stream of data, and here in the case I show of stream of blood pressure monitor, but really have a stratified view of their whole patient population or set of the patient population, be notified with specific interesting event. Sometimes a lack of measurement is much more meaningful than a specific measurement. And so we are and work very hard. We are very aware and work very hard on making sure that what I start my presentation with ensuring that we develop a sustainable and constant data stream does not end up in a data flow at the other end of the spectrum. So I'm sorry, I'm going so very fast. I'll be very happy to discuss further with the panel and take any questions today.
Oh, thank you. Great presentation, and I feel like I should stand up here, though I don't know if it would help or hurt the product if I testify to using it, because maybe it works well for blood pressure, less well for BMI. One of the interesting points that you brought up, I thought at the end there, was the challenge that even was brought up earlier, where people talk about the problem of physicians being deluged by data, and of, well, what am I supposed, what is a physician, the many in the audience, what do you do with patients who do what you want and actually start to check and are interested and are engaged, all those wonderful qualities, and then they sort of start to present all this data that scare the crap out of the medical systems. It sounds like, if I'm hearing you right, you've approached that by creating a provider interface that essentially distills and makes sense of the information coming out of the other end. Is there a challenge to reach most providers with that approach, given how many use sort of formalized EMR systems?
Yes, so I mean, obviously that's part of the challenge, and obviously it requires some change of the organization. So, and we've got just previously a beautiful example on how we can reorganize the unit and the caregivers around this new stream of data. The second type of challenge is how do we plug on the AMR. We've been, I think, quite pioneers on developing these APIs that enables our system to be plugged into any others. And we've been integrating in some of the major EHR here because we know that this is only a partial view, and we do not have the pretensions, of
Right.
of
But
having
it
a
seems like the
comprehensive
real
view.
value that you bring here is sort of making the data more useful and less scary. Instead of just saying, here, you can access this massive stream of numbers, if I'm hearing you right, it sounds like a big value add is organizing it in a way that is quickly useful for the provider. Is that insight translate into the EMR systems?
That's a good question. So there are some health systems that, and specifically EHR solutions that have modules to have this view, which is really new or disruptive from EHR, data set and just a patient profile. When we look, and we heard before, look at constant monitoring and not just chunk of periodic data sets. Would like to mention that on the other hand, making insights is also calling for a new type of feature. When we talk about blood pressure monitoring, you can take one blood pressure monitoring, and there are ways to codify this measurement. But having one measure of blood pressure doesn't mean you have a hypertension. So we've added features in our app so that you are entering a protocol, and provided you comply with certain series of measurements, you input some additional information on the context, you can have a feedback or how you classify what's your state of tension, of blood pressure.
Sir.
Nice talk. You have lots of devices out there, so you're kind of in a nice position to be able to say, which devices do people use the longest for which kinds of applications and which kinds of participants? Do you have data on that anywhere that you can talk about that we could all look at?
So yes, we do have data, and this user loyalty is a key parameter for us. Scales, have been, very successful in being, once it's installed, it's set up, again, it doesn't call for any type of weird stuff like having your mobile phone next to it, etc. It's connected to Wi-Fi, so it's very, and we have multi-year, average loyalty with this device. But it informs every product we do. When we look at sleep monitoring, we believe in the stationary sensors because once it's set up under the mattress, it stays, and it does generate a new kind of loyalty. When we look at wearable, we are obsessed with battery life. So you are wearing 3 wearables, so I'm wearing one that doesn't look like a wearable of sensors. Again, for us, it's very important. And also that works for 1 month, and then you recharge over 1 month. This is not a detail in order to ensure that these products are sustainable.
What's your second longest device? The scale is probably the longest. What's the second?
So I would say stationary device. So clearly sleep sensors like a sleep pad are very once they're installed, they do not. They are power plugs. So
Quick question over here. You hinted at data-driven, personalized coaching. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Do you try different coaching styles and you just see what works on the person, whether you berate them or encourage them, and just see if they're losing weight or gaining weight?
So. Yes, so we have a long history of and seeing different type of motivation. We've had some competitive features for people who like to be competitive. This notion of goal setting and tracking. So there is very documented way to motivate people. But what I was referring to is a feature that we just announced and will be in the coming months, integrating coaching program over a specific period with some weeks of learning, discovery learning, and adherence to certain behavioral change that will be rolling out next summer. So hopefully you get all the things that we've learned in the past working well and less well will turn into this feature.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.